Hi everyone, welcome to the Sacred Path School podcast number 11. So in this podcast, what I want to talk about is how to create a self-mastery system. And you probably gathered, covered quite a lot of ground in this podcast so far. And as I explained in podcast number 10, my thought is that basically to do one more of this series and then I'll start interviewing people. And I also want to say, if you're wondering why I didn't upload this podcast 2 weeks ago, the simple answer is COVID. So like everybody else, I've been going through the COVID challenge. Anyway, so we're back on track here with podcast number 11. All right. So remember in the last podcast, we looked at what are the implications of assumptions. And I shared a few quotes, and I particularly wanted just to revisit this quote from Daniel Pinchbeck, where he quotes Gurdjieff. So if understanding is linked to being, then certain types of phenomena can only be comprehended when the observer has changed. All right, so as Gurdjieff said, there are things for the understanding of which a different being is necessary. And this transformative process takes place in stages over time. So I guess the key thing to be aware of with regard to this whole area, I suppose, of like how do you walk a sacred path, is that you can't work it out in a logical, rational way. So it's not like, getting a maths problem, 2 + 2 and saying, what does that mean? What is it for? There are things that, as it says there, you just can't understand until things have evolved. And so some of the key concepts that I talked about, I'll just go to the next slide here. Some of the key concepts that I talked about in the last podcast were about understanding the key shifts. So the key shifts were releasing self-importance, walking between the worlds, so being able to walk between, past, present, future, and understanding that, what would you call it, sort of relationship with time, and bearing in mind that various people, including Stephen Hawking, suggest that time goes forwards and backwards, which again completely messes with your head if you're trying to work it out from like a logical, rational perspective. Mastery of intent. Getting beyond thinking. So again, getting beyond the idea of being able to think through things, and being able to, allow, yourself to evolve, like the Gurdjieff quote. Becoming comfortable in uncertainty, because obviously if you are stuck trying to remain in certainty, then by definition you're going to be stuck basically perpetuating the same past-present loop over and over again. And you need to find some way of stepping out of your comfort zone to be able to, again, allow yourself to evolve. Working with cycles, so understanding the circular nature of creation, and surrendering to spirit. So surrendering to something bigger than self. And I'm not trying to be sort of airy-fairy about it, but it's just in terms of what that allows you to do in terms of receiving information. So the key question is this. So if you're going to create a self-mastery system in a complex, changing environment, what are the elements? So what would you put into that system to enable you to achieve self-mastery? And remember that self-mastery is not about saying, how do I become perfect or something like that. Self-mastery is about, I think a good analogy is if you think about it, above the line, below the line, or green zone, amber zone, red zone. So self-mastery is really about asking the question of like, how do I actually, I suppose, gain some mastery over myself, so that I can focus on my good part, and grow my good part, and basically deal with my, shadow side, dark side, whatever you want to call it. And remembering what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a path of ascension, right? So how do we go up? And again, that looks different depending upon what your various sort of religious or spiritual beliefs are. But essentially what it means is becoming better in some way, And again, what I'm talking about here is really a path of ascension. So what are the elements you want to put in the system? All right. So the first thing is an understanding of how we create our reality. If you've been listening to this podcast, that's basically where I started off, is talking about existential philosophy. And remember, existential philosophy is dealing with the nature of existence. And it's focused on what we can actually do. So it's not an airy-fairy philosophy. And again, you can go back to podcast 1 and listen to that, and also podcast 2, I suppose, with some of Jean-Paul Sartre's work. It's really about, it's about the concrete, about saying, like, how do we actually create it? And that model, that existential model that I shared, the past, present, future stuff, which I suppose really has evolved from Martin Heidegger's work on being and time, and as I said, also Jean-Paul Sartre's work. It's a model that when you look at it, you think, oh yeah, that's really simple. But it's really about, again, being able to try it out in the real world and apply some of the concepts and see what actually happens, because weird and wonderful things happen. Well, let me put it to you that way. And I'm not trying to be sort of airy-fairy or funny about it, but it goes back to that Gurdjieff quote of understanding that basically you don't know, like, you're not as smart as you think you actually are. And so being able to delve into that relationship between being and time, and understanding how being changes over time, and applying it in the real world is really critical, to be able to, I suppose, change your way of being and learn. And again, I know I said this already, but again, it's about how do we actually create the ascension process. The second thing is a clear vision process. So if we go back to the key shifts, so key shifts, remember, mastery of intent. I suppose I should mention as well, with the existential stuff. So the existential stuff is really about being able to walk between the worlds. So walk between the past, present, future. And I'd suggest also, the existential stuff is about helping you to release self-importance, because if you, from an existential perspective, remember the key question to ask is, what's your belief between the balance between free will and destiny? Okay. So, and I'd suggest, like, self-importance really comes from this idea that, somehow, what's going on, it's all ego, and it's all about me, blah, 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 blah. And if we embrace the idea of free will, then the future hasn't been created yet. And so really anything is possible. And so self-importance is going to limit you to what is possible, okay? The third shift is the mastery of intent. So with mastery of intent, you need to have some sort of clear vision process, because if you aren't able to reinvent yourself, obviously your intent is going to be, I suppose, unclear. And when we talked about a clear vision process, we talked about two things. So first of all, understanding that when you're doing visioning, there's the 5 areas you can do visioning in. So physical, mental, emotional, material, and spiritual. And remember, the process that I suggest you go through is do a quick self-assessment on where you are in those 5 areas, and then say, what does good actually look like? Now, if you do that, what you're basically working on, or what you're creating, I suppose, is your foundation. Right? So what are you actually standing on? What's the foundation that you're standing on? Then with regard to vision, so bigger picture vision, a vision process would be something like, and the indigenous peoples of the world, the older peoples of the world, all have processes for how to do visioning. So American Indians do formal vision quests on the equinox, when they sit in polenta circles for up to 4 days and call in vision. Australian Aborigines go walkabout. I think I mentioned before, Jesus went into the desert, Moses went up the mountain, etc. In the West, the developed West, and that's obviously a broad statement, but in the West, we're very short on good visioning processes. And I think it's one of the reasons why people end up suffering from existential angst. So existential angst is angst arising from the nature of existence. And so if you don't have a clear idea about what you're actually doing here, in other words, what your vision is or what you're trying to create, then obviously it's going to create levels of existential angst. I would suggest with a clear vision process, and again, this is one of these things where you've got to actually work it out for yourself, work out what works for you. But personally, what I like to do is to check in with vision once a year. And personally, I follow the American Indian process, so on the equinoxes. So when the equinox is equal day, equal night, so, the forces of the cosmos are in balance. And at that point, you check in with vision and basically say, okay, so am I on the right track? Is there anything that I'm missing? Is there anything I want to create in my life? You can also do different activities. So you can do, I suppose, more, I would call them, I suppose, intellectual type activities, like thinking about, okay, so if you died, what would you like somebody to write in your eulogy? So what would you like a eulogy to say? Or thinking about, okay, you're on your deathbed and you've had a good life, like what looking back, what does it actually look like? What are the key things? But remembering what you're trying to do here is get a clear idea of what it is that you're trying to create so that you can have clear intent, right? So that when you're engaging with the world, I suppose you're, like with visioning, what you're trying to do is, plant seeds of possibility, right? So plant seeds of possibility. Now, some of that is going to go back to some of the assumption stuff. So if you believe that you are here to achieve some particular destiny or some particular path, obviously part of the visioning process is going to be trying to connect with that path or destiny. So, for example, like I said, American Indians will sit in Phalange circles and call in vision. Right, so you're not pretending that you actually know what the answer is. You're not pretending that you can actually work that out, but you're calling to spirit world, whatever, to actually show you what you're actually missing. And again, if you don't believe in that, so if you believe in free will, then you would create vision in a completely different way. You wouldn't feel that you are bound at all by destiny or fate. So see how the assumptions that you make influence how you're actually going to go through these processes, and why these processes of or vision processes are particular to the individual, and also to whatever your cultural or spiritual or faith type background is. If you're Christian, for example, you would call to God, for example, to show you, what you should be doing. And there's many examples of that. And in no way would I suggest that you judge the visioning processes of different spiritual beliefs or cultures, because, again, all of them, I would suggest to you, are about trying to create pathways of ascension. And again, think about the example of Australian Aborigines going walkabout. So why do you go walkabout? Basically for vision. How are you trying to get vision? By walking on the earth, like feeling the feet on the earth, and actually calling on the elemental spirits to inform you. If you look at it from a shamanic type practices, the whole time, the world is trying to communicate with you. So whether it be the animals, the birds, the bees, the trees, etc., etc., etc. And the key thing is to actually pay attention. Like pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. But whatever it is, you need to have that in your system to actually work out whether or not you're on path or off path, so that, again, you can walk the path of ascension and avoid existential angst. The third thing that you need to embed or put into your self-mastery system is circular feedback loops. Right, because remember what we're trying to do, remember what we're trying to do is become comfortable in uncertainty and get beyond thinking, and also work with cycles, okay? So if you're thinking about this stuff from a linear perspective, right? So if you're thinking about this stuff in terms of a straight line perspective and thinking about, okay, faced with a problem, first thing you do is look and do basically root cause analysis. So you look backwards, you say, what's the cause of this problem? How do I fix it? Project your solution forwards. The problem with that, as I've explained in previous podcasts, is that in an uncertain, changing environment, it's really hard to do that. And obviously, it's really hard to predict the future. And obviously what's happened in the world over the last couple of years with the challenges of COVID has shown us, many times we've thought, oh, okay, we've got this sorted out, but it hasn't been sorted out. So you need to shift from linear type thinking to circular feedback loops. So going around, how do I go around? How do I go around, right? And I'd suggest to you that you need a number of these feedback loops. So the first little feedback loop is daily practice, right? So what does your daily practice look like? So in the morning, how do you establish your intention? How do you start to become proactive and intentional rather than reactive, right? And again, lots of different people do lots of different things. Some people do meditation, some people go for a run, some people jump into, freezing cold ice baths and things like that to get them going. But whatever it is, what you're trying to do is create a good day, right? So you think about it in the morning. Your morning practice is getting yourself going, setting your intention for the day. Middle of the day, you might check in, am I on track? End of the day, so we circle back around, right? And always when you circle back around, what you want to do is you want to hack the brain, okay? Because the brain is going to default into what went wrong. And so what you want to do is hack the brain by asking the question of, okay, so what went right? So what did you do right? What are you grateful for, right? So there's your daily practice. Outside of the daily practice, you might do like a weekly feedback loop, right? So think about start of the week. What's my key intention for this week? Go back around, again, end of the week. What did I do right? What am I grateful for? What's my intention for next week? So see how you got circles within circles. And then, as I said, annually, what you might do is do a vision quest, right? So we go all the way around. So we've got daily practice, weekly practice, yearly practice, right? And again, in there, your question might be with vision quest is, okay, what's worked really well in the last year? Am I on track with my vision? What's my key intention for the coming year? But always what you're trying to do is create these little circular feedback loops. And again, I would suggest to you what you're trying to do is spiral upwards, right? So how do I spiral upwards? How do I create paths of attention? So paths of ascension, so I can get better and better at things. The fourth thing that you need in your self-mastery system is flow states and happiness practices, right? Because again, I'd suggest to you that we would all like to be happy. We would all like to lead a happy life. There's not much point being like greatly spiritual and all that sort of stuff, but suffering the whole way, it'd be good to be happy. And we know from the happiness research, we know from the happiness research that a lot of the stuff about happiness is about deciding to be happy and then obviously actually doing something about it. So having a plan for what are you actually going to do about it. And two things a lot of stuff has been written about this as well, right? But two things to think about with this is flow states. And again, you can Google flow states and have a look at this, but basically a flow state is a state where you have, I suppose, lost track of time, like you've let go of the, sort of connection with time, and you're so involved in an activity that you're actually in a flow state. So if you're putting together a system, then one of the key questions to ask is, okay, what do I actually do that allows me to get into a flow state? And often it's some sort of hobby, but this is where also you can cross over with the neurocognitive science stuff about flexibility in the brain and aging. and one of the key things with flow states, one of the key activities with flow states and aging is any sort of activity where to learn the activity, you have to basically use left brain, so use thinking stuff to learn it. But to actually be able to do it, you need to be able to let go of thinking about it and enable yourself or allow yourself to go into the process. So things like the classic one for aging is ballroom dancing, because you have to, to do the ballroom dancing, you have to think about, I could put my foot here and then there and then there and then there, right? But then to actually be able to do it, as I said, you need to be able to let go of thinking about it and go with the flow. Lots of other things like that. Pretty much, I would say, any sort of musical instrument, right? So think about it again. If you're learning like a new piece of music, you've got to think about it, but to actually be able to play the music, you've got to be able to let go of it. Drumming, anything like that. Drumming, dancing, singing, etc., but also any sort of hobby. And the key to this, so the key to this is to be able to schedule time to actually do those activities. So see how now we're coming back around to the existential stuff. Because remember, in the existential stuff, what you're trying to do is you're trying to delve into the relationship between being and time, right? Being and time. How am I spending my time? So what's my state of being as I'm spending my time? And if you recognize that from a visioning type perspective, that what you want to do is you want to lead a happy life, path of ascension, etc. And maybe you recognize, hopefully you recognize, listening to this podcast, is that what you would like to be able to do is to be happy. Then what I'm suggesting to you is to A, do the work to work out what it is that you can do that allows you to get into a flow state, but then B, put it into your weekly routine, so you're actually allocating time to it. And often what happens with these things is, so people can recognize they get great benefit out of doing various activities, but then they get busy, right? So they get busy at work or with family or whatever, and the first thing that comes up is the rational mind says, you haven't got time to do that, right? You haven't got time to do that, don't do it. So then they don't do it. But it not only affects their well-being, it affects a whole lot of other things in their lives. Right, so it has bigger implications than just the activity itself. The other way of thinking about like happiness practices is to have a look at the work of Martin Seligman on positive psychology, and his model is the PERMA model. So P is, I always get this wrong, so positive emotions, I have to think about this, R is relationships, M is meaning, A is accomplishment, E is emotions, yeah. I think that's right. Anyway, you can have a look at that. You can Google Martin Seligman and also the Authentic Happiness website. And there's a whole range of tools in there. But see, again, it's one of these things about actually thinking about what do I actually want? So A, I want to be happy. Okay, B, what's your strategy for creating it? So flow states, daily happiness practices, etc. And then C, allocating time to it. And then creating like the feedback loop. So you go, I wonder what would happen if I did this activity, come back around, does it actually match up? So see how the different elements work together. The fifth element that you need in the self-mastery system is spirit work, right? And again, this is one of these things where I'm saying, like, don't get all airy-fairy on this or freak out, right? Because the spirit work is basically about strengthening faith. And I don't mean religious faith, although there's nothing wrong with religious faith. What I mean is that if you go back to the existential model, so the past, present, future, and remembering that from a neurocognitive science perspective, the brain is going to default into the past, present loop, right? So the brain's going to default into pattern matching. Every situation you go into, the brain's looking, okay, what's this similar to what I've experienced before? And if it finds something, it's basically going to pattern match, okay? And remembering as well that the key characteristic of systems one thinking is you can't turn it off, right? You can't stop yourself from pattern matching. So if I say what's 2 plus 2, you can't stop 4 jumping into your head. Likewise, when you come into a situation, you can't stop yourself from pattern matching. And pattern matching, by definition, basically drives you into subconscious behavioural subconscious behaviours where you're not actually thinking about it, even though you delusionally think, or we delusionally think, that we are actually conscious. The reality is you're not, right? If you want to get into the future present loop, so if we want to be intentional and create something new, then by definition, you're stepping out of your comfort zone. Okay, because remember, the pattern matching is comfortable. Pattern matching, been there, done that before, no risk, plenty of evidence, drop into it, no problem, right? Future present loop, stepping out of the comfort zone, no idea how you're going to do it, so you got your vision there, right? Now, by definition, faith is the ability to believe in something where there is no direct evidence, right? So believe in something where there is no direct evidence. So if you think about the existential model, if you're going to believe that a particular future outcome is possible, but there's no direct evidence, then it requires faith, okay? The opposite of faith, and again, we've talked about this in the past, the opposite of faith is basically cynicism, where you go, you don't believe in anything, right, other than the stuff that you can actually physically, you see, touch and feel. But again, see how that limits you to past present loop and limits you to basically same old, and a way of thinking that's going to drive you down the path of how do I fix this, which again is going to limit you to the only things that you can actually understand. So you can't get beyond thinking. See how this works, right? So it's one of these things where you do something not to try and work it out or solve it, but to try and create an environment where you can actually grow or achieve a different level of consciousness, like Daniel Pinchbeck and Gurdjieff are suggesting. So see how some of these activities in self-mastery process are, I suppose, not directly aimed at what the outcome is, but create a secondary outcome, which is actually what you're looking for. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. So what does that mean anyway? What does that mean? Spirit work to strengthen faith. What are the sorts of things that you would actually do? Good, right? Because remember, you've got to actually find ways of believing in something where there's no direct evidence. So basically, any sort of spiritual practices. So meditation, contemplation, anything like I would include gratitude practices as spirit work, because you're consciously focusing on what you're grateful for. I would also say that consciously and deliberately expressing appreciation is a good spirit work, because you're giving your appreciation to other people and actually helping other people. Also, anything that allows you to connect to the earth, right? So walking in nature, I would also say walking on the earth with bare feet, anything like that. And again, you probably might roll your eyes and say, what are you actually talking about, right? But the interesting thing about this is not only are some of these practices in spiritual teachings and ancient teachings, now they're also getting validated by neurocognitive science, where neurocognitive science, researchers do weird and wonderful things where they stick fMRI machines on people's heads and get them to, walk through the forest and stuff like that. And so what effects does it actually have on people to walk with the forest or walk on the beach? And now we know in a, what would you call it, sort of logical scientific perspective, what these things actually do to the brain, and all of it's beneficial, right? Also, same as meditation. There's been huge amounts of research done on meditation where they look at the contrast between people who meditate, people who have meditated for a long period of time, like monks, and then people doing meditation short term, and they look at what actually happens to their brain, and it changes the actual physical structure, I suppose is the right word, of the brain. Basically, it changes the way that the brain responds to things. So see how again, it's another one of these things where you do meditation. You might do meditation to calm yourself down, but over a period of time, it has an impact on your actual brain. Also, again, we know from the stress research. So we know from the stress research that one of the things that happens when you stressed out is you get the vagal nerve. So the vagal nerve is basically the biggest nerve that goes from the back of your skull down to the top of your butt. We know that it tightens up, and we also know that your DNA tightens up, right? So when you're doing meditation, obviously you're trying to release that sort of stuff. But what happens over a period of time is that instead of actually reacting to an event like that, what you end up creating is a bottom-up approach, right? So basically you respond to stress in a completely different way. And again, it's one of these things where you might start doing meditation for stress or for clarity or something like that, and over a period of time you actually start to physically change the structure of your brain. So again, any of those sorts of things, any of those sorts of activities, spirit work, are going to be extremely beneficial to your self-mastery and to enabling you to ascend upwards. And also, interestingly enough, to enable you to get beyond thinking. Because remember, if you are stuck in a thinking mode, you're going to be stuck again with what's right in front of me, right? And that means, again, you're limited to what you're actually able to take in, and you're going to limit your growth. So part of that, the spirit work, is about working out what you're actually going to do, and again, embedding those processes or that time in your weekly practice or daily practice. And the second part of that is to cross that over with the circular thinking stuff. Okay. So, for example, one of the sort of spirit work things that you could do, if you look at American Indian type stuff, is sweat lodges. So sweat lodges are a renewal ceremony, right? So you're basically renewing. And ideally what you do is do sweat lodges on either full moon or new moon, right? So you're doing it regularly. You're coming round, we're going round, going round. See the importance of that? But you can't do that unless you actually plan to do that and put it into your system. And again, in the West, again, sorry, I'm using it as a sort of broad generalization, but in the West, we can be very stuck in linear type thinking. And what we're trying to do is like break that up and get into circular type loops and things like that, which is, again, why there's benefits in embedding these sorts of things. What do we get to? 6, I think. 1, 2, yep, 6. Okay, so the 6th thing is a reset process, right? So in your self-mastery process, self-mastery system, sorry, you should be thinking about, okay, what am I going to do when things aren't working? Because periodically, I'm sure you're aware, we have challenges, we lose the plot, whatever. So we need to think about what are you actually going to do if things aren't working? And what I would suggest to you is the first key to that is to empower yourself to call it when things aren't working. Because I'd suggest to you that one of the worst ways of being, or maybe worst isn't the right word, stressful, something like that. Let's go with worst anyway. So one of the worst states of being is when you're trying to do something and it's not working. So you're trying to create something and it's not working, and there's a little voice in the back of your head going, this is not working, this is not working, this is not working. And your rational mind is overriding them, going, shush, shh, don't distract me, we're just going to go on. So you keep plodding away, even though part of you knows it's not flipping working, right? And you keep actually denying the reality, I suppose, or the intuitive guidance that it's not actually working. Now, again, we know from like success type formulas that one of the key things you need to be able to do is to fail fast. Going through the process of empowering yourself to call a breakdown is, I would suggest to you, the first key step in that. So basically, don't sugarcoat it. Like, agree that, you know what, when things aren't working, I'm going to call it. Time out, I'm calling a breakdown. And then a simple breakdown process goes, so the first thing to distinguish is between the story and the facts. Okay, because the story will be a big, long, emotive thing. They did, I did, blah, 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 right? The facts will be, okay? So we want to make the distinction. So we want to enable the brain to make the distinction, because the story lives in the past. The story is a subjective, interpretive story about what's already happened, right? It's in the past. And see how it's subjective, not objective. The facts live in the present. They're completely objective. Something either is or isn't. No argument, is or isn't, okay? And so to help the brain make that distinction is key, because see how we're making the distinction between past and present? Then your next question is, okay, go over to the future. What are you actually committed to? Now, you probably worked out that unless you've actually done the visioning process, you won't have a clarity of commitment. See how the elements work together? So hopefully you've done your visioning process and you can go, what are you committed to? So you go over into the future and revisit that vision. Your next question there is, am I actually still committed? Because you know how sometimes you can have a vision or an ideal or something like that, and you get to the point where you go, you know what, I'm done. I can't do this. I'm not committed anymore, right? So if that's the case, that's fine. Again, this is one of these fail fast things that allows you to reset and go into something else. But If you are still committed, asking the question is the empowerment question, right? Are you still committed? Yes, right? And then we want to come back. So see how we've gone past story, present, facts, future, vision, and then we come back, right? Remember what we're trying to do is get into the future present loop, right? So if you want to get into the future present loop, there's 5 key conversations you need to have, okay? And if you're out of the present future loop, so in other words, you have a breakdown, one of those conversations is missing. And the 5 conversations are, number 1, people. So you've got the wrong people involved, haven't discussed how you're going to work together, haven't got the support of key people, etc. Right? The second conversation is ideas. So far out, I'm short of ideas. I've got this great vision, but I have no ideas about how to actually create it. Third one is resources. So you haven't got enough time, energy, money, information, whatever, right? Fourth one is action. Not doing what I say I'm going to do, right? So the procrastination scenario, okay? And then the 5th conversation is the breakdown conversation. So not calling breakdowns, like I said at the start, delusionally thinking that things are going to magically sort themselves out without actually saying far out, time out, breakdown, okay? So what you do when you go through that process is you work out which one of these things is missing, right? And then obviously the next thing is go ahead and do it. So see how we've come like out of that loop and we drive it back into action, right? Into action. And remembering again that we live in a cause and effect world. So if you want to influence the world or influence your state of being, remember the point of power is the present, right? Where spirit and matter connect. And the way we exercise power is through action. So we want to drive it into action. That's why you need the reset process. The last thing that you want in your system is a process or, a process for intentional collaboration, right? Intentional collaboration. So put simply, we do not live in a bubble, right? So we're living in a world with a whole lot of different people. And again, if you think about the quantum physics, we're all interlinked by a quantum field. And so basically we're in this together, okay? So what I do affects you, what you do affects me. And if you think about it from a spiritual perspective, I would suggest you, and again, it's always a risk to say all, right? But I'd say pretty much all spiritual teachings talk about the concept of unity, right? About, again, being in it together, okay? So if that's the case, work with it. Work out what is my plan or strategy for collaboration. And part of that is simply identifying the key people that you want to collaborate with and explicitly engaging them in that process and saying, can we actually work together here? How are we going to work together? So see how, again, all the elements are going to fit together? All right, so there's the elements. And I should also say, just a little plug here, if you want to do a course in how to create a self-mastery system, you can actually go to the Sacred Path School Thinkific page. The link is at the end of this PowerPoint slide. And also you can find the link on the LinkedIn Sacred Path School page and also the Facebook Sacred Path School page. But yeah, I think if you just Google or search anyway for the Sacred Path School Thinkific, then you'll find the link. And you can actually go through the 8-step process. If you don't want to do that, you can also contact me. I take limited numbers of people through the self-mastery process over generally a 2-month period. So basically each week you do, there's 8 steps in it. Each week you do a step and then what's next, okay? But the key to the whole thing is about thinking about this from a systemic perspective. So how do I put a system in place that's going to allow me to achieve self-mastery, not how do I fix myself, okay? Because again, the fixing stuff is limited. All right, so just last couple of things here. I want to re-presence or refocus the Steiner quote that I had in the last podcast. Okay, so I'll just read it out. So according to Steiner, there is another self, a hidden spiritual being, which is the individual's guide and guardian, which, quote, does not make itself known through thoughts or inner words. It acts through deeds, processes, and events. It is this other self that leads the soul through the details of its life destiny and evokes its capacities, tendencies, and talents, right? So you see how if you adhere to that, and so see how this is aligned as well to the Gurdjieff quote at the start, that's why it's really important to let go of thinking that you know what the answer is and instead create a intentional experiment, and do it in like a circular feedback loop, right? So you can actually learn from it. So what worked? How do I actually learn from it? The other thing that I would just like to quickly touch on is some of the challenges in the theory, right? So I'll just go through some of the challenges in the theory that you might face. So the first thing is existentialism. So some of the challenges here, the fate versus destiny question, which I've talked about before, blocks from negative stories and baggage, right? So this is past stuff that you might be holding on to that limits your capacity or ability to be able to see something bigger. Self-worth and worthiness, imposter syndrome, procrastination. In complexity theory, the challenge is the brain's need for certainty. So remember, the brain wants to, what's the answer? What's the answer? What's the answer? How do I make sense of this? And you need to find some way of releasing that and being comfortable in uncertainty. Neurocognitive science, the challenge is the lazy brain. So remember the systems 2 thinking, the characteristic of it is it's lazy. So you need to find ways of actually activating that part of the brain. And missing the cubic centimetre of opportunity. So this is, Carlos Castaneda talked about this, the cubic centimetre of opportunity. And that's the bit where, before you've even thought about it, the systems 1 thinking has pattern matched the past, so you've missed the opportunity. Systems thinking, the challenge is, which I said before, is changing from linear to circular thinking. Intentional change theory, the challenge is time horizons, right? So time horizons relate very closely to your capacity to have faith. So if you have limited faith, your time horizon is going to be really short. So in other words, you can only think about, tomorrow, next week, whatever. If you have faith and you have, I suppose, comfort and uncertainty, you can think much further out. So see the time horizon. The other challenge in the intentional change theory is not asking for help, right? So thinking you can work it all out yourself or that you're on your own. So that goes back to the intentional collaboration stuff. Happiness theory, the challenge is focusing on the wrong thing, right? So, and what that means is that if you're focusing on being happy, you're probably focusing on the wrong thing. What I'd suggest to you is you've got to focus on being grateful, and then that allows joy to arise. But if you're overwhelmingly focused on happiness, then often what happens is you paying attention to the fact that you're not happy, okay? The 7th thing is habits and the importance of play and reward. So play, curiosity, I wonder, making it explicit, right? So not, I suppose, implying that you're trying to create things, but actually making it really explicit. This is what I'm trying to create. This is my process, etc. And the challenge in collaboration theory is communicating for truth, right? Because often when, or if we've had bad experiences with people, we might get paranoid and wonder what somebody's agenda is or something like that, or accidentally or deliberately fall into manipulative type behaviours. And the challenge is, like I said, communicating for truth and being able to reveal our whole selves. I wonder if you can hear that whip there as well. Revealing our whole selves so that we can actually collaborate in truth. And just to finish off, so last little quote. So again, this is a quote from the last one, but I just want to represent it. So this is David Bohm. Reality is what we take to be true. What we take to be true is what we believe, and what we believe determines what we take to be true. So see how it go round and round and round? So again, the importance of creating circular feedback loops and thinking about it in the context of a path of ascension, okay? That's about it for this podcast. Hope you found that useful. Like I said, next time, hopefully you won't get sick again, right? But next time, we're going to look at, okay, so how do we actually summarise all this whole series, really, I suppose, into key questions for all this sort of stuff, and also I'm going to talk about like my answers to those key questions. Alrighty, so I'm going to leave it there, and be well, everybody. We're facing challenges in the world at the moment with stuff that's going on. And as I said, we really need to find ways of collaborating and working together. So I'll leave it on that. Thank you. Bye for now.